Welcome to the Vets Talking Pets podcast. From scales to tails, real talk with real vets. No pet subject is off limits. With your hosts, Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. Hello and welcome to this episode of Vets Talking Pets. Last time we were talking about attractions and things like rides with animals, but we talked about domestic species, horses, donkeys, llamas, elephants, as elephants are domestic species in parts of the world. So we're going to continue on the same theme, but we're going to talk about wild and exotic animals today. So I suppose the place to start really is zoos, isn't it, Vanessa?
It is, and I think whenever you go on holiday you always see big signs for zoos, no matter what country you're in. And I always have a concern. I was like, oh no, is it okay for us to go and have a look or not? And I know certainly when we were in Lapland, actually, the place that we were staying was right next to it was a zoo that had polar bears and other Arctic species there, and it becomes a bit of a quandary then as to know whether it's okay to actually support that zoo. So I think really important. Let's talk about zoos, because the ethics of zoos really is a big topic, isn't it? It's not maybe something we can fully cover today, because we're just going to give a bit of an overview, but let's just kind of talk about what we need to look out for, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're in the UK, then zoos have to be licensed, and that means obviously that there's a set of welfare standards that they have to comply with, and also some of it's about health and safety, isn't it? Because obviously they have to actually have somebody who can use a gun should the situation arise, but it should be obviously that the animals have their welfare needs met and have enough space. Obviously in other parts of the world that may not be the case. I think a lot of places in sort of Northern Europe probably have quite good standards, but you certainly have to take a bit of care and do a bit of research, I think, with many zoos in other parts of the world, because there may be absolutely no controls over them whatsoever. I suppose the really important thing is the animals should not have been taken from the wild. There really is no need to do that anymore, and whether it's ethically right or not obviously is a big question. And generally now zoos, certainly in the UK, are generally working on conservation projects, breeding projects and things like that, or where the animals have been rescued from situations like the illegal pet trade. So they're sort of there for a reason rather than being taken from the wild. So it's certainly worth checking that out. It may not be the same, I suppose, in other parts of the world. So I think if in doubt, then probably you should steer clear.
Yeah, and I think it is, isn't it? It's, as you said, it's important to do your research, and actually if you can see photographs and any video or etc. of the zoo before you go, to actually be fully informed and to look to see what enclosures the animals are in. Do they have enrichment in their enclosures? Are they big? Are they small? What condition are the animals in, and actually what species are there, isn't it? And it may be difficult to actually ascertain whether they've been bred there or whether they've come from the wild. So finding out as much as you can, and actually if you're in any doubt and you're worried about the welfare of the animals that are there, then actually not supporting them is the important thing. Don't visit.
And certainly you can often find photos online, and I suppose the better ones tend to be more open about it, and certainly there are zoos in America where the animals get loads of space. And I went to San Diego Zoo a few years ago, mainly to see the pandas that they've got there, and there obviously it's a very well-known zoo, and they all had a lot of space, and also there's one, I can't remember where it is, it's somewhere on the east coast of America, where they've got this massive sort of dome that is like a sort of almost like a jungle or a rainforest, and they have a lot of parrots that actually have proper space to fly. So there can be some places where an awful lot of effort has been made and money spent, obviously, but also, you know, I've seen some places in some other parts of the world where it wasn't actually great. So do try and perhaps look at some photos and things like that. But obviously it can be fun and educational, you know, if you're going to a good facility.
That's right. So those zoos where you're happy that the welfare is good for the animals there, but you could spend time, there's obviously activities such as feedings, and there you can all spending a day with being a keeper, so you can actually go and interact as much as you can with the animals. You might watch them training the animals as well, and actually it can be really fun and educational, particularly for children, to understand, you know, these are wild animals, etc. But this is what we can be doing and interacting with them, what's safe to do, and actually, you know, what do they eat, what's their behaviour like, what's their lifestyle like, what environment do they need to be in. We can learn all of these things. So actually, are they endangered, what are we doing conservation wise? So there could be lots to learn from actually doing those activities.
And I always think it's quite clever on the part of the zoos if they get you to sort of shovel animal poo for a day.
That's true.
I've done a couple of things, and I did a cheetah experience at the Big Cat Sanctuary, which I have to say was very good. They're captive bred, part of a breeding program, but what was really interesting was watching them being trained. They trained them such that they could actually do a lot of things with them. I don't mean tricks, I mean for their own health. They could do health checks, they could listen to their heart, they could vaccinate them without having to sedate them. Obviously cheetahs are much less likely to kill you than some of the other big cats, so there wasn't quite the same threat. So we could go in with them and watch them. And you may have heard of clicker training, which is usually with dogs, but you can do it with lots of species. And they use a target rather than a clicker, but it is a food reward based training. So they just got them to sit in a certain position so that they could have health checks. And with some animals they get them to the stage where they can have blood samples taken without sedation. And I went to another place where they'd trained one of the bears. It was an old bear that needed its claws clipping a lot, where they had in effect like a letterbox, and it would put its claws through and they could clip its claws. Clever, so it was really for their welfare. It wasn't a sort of trick type scenario, and that was just really fascinating. And obviously I was just thrilled to be really close to some cheetahs. But yes, you have to be careful that it is something where it's not having a negative effect on the animals, and a lot of these ones that I'm talking about had been quite socialised, I suppose, to people from being cubs, but again, it's about doing your research. But it is a thrill, you know, and it was very exciting to do that, and we did feed them as well. But obviously with care with that.
Yes, those big claws, those big cats.
Yes,
and big
just
teeth.
Don't have your thumb out when you're doing it, and using gloves and things like that.
Which is, the standards of health and safety and hygiene should be high, aren't they? So again, if there's any doubt in terms of the health and safety of the zoo, then we'd say stay far away from it and actually don't visit. And making sure that it's not a situation where those animals are forced to interact. So we want it to be that actually the animals are choosing to be there and are happy to be in that environment with the public. Aquaria as well, I suppose that's the other thing to cover, thinking about fish and other sea life that we might find within an enclosed space like a zoo. So what do we think of those then, Maggie?
Yeah, and I think there's certainly been a lot of concern, I think, with a lot of aquaria. Just really that often, I think with the fish, smaller fish, then, you know, hopefully as long as they've got enough space, and obviously it's the right type of water and the right type of temperatures, and that they're not mixing the wrong species together where one eats the others, it can be okay. But I think it can become a real problem where there's either bigger fish or marine mammals, and I think there's certainly been a lot of concern with things like dolphins even some of the big turtles and things like that. Obviously not mammals, reptiles, but where they just don't have enough room. And I think particularly if you're talking about things like orcas,
Yeah, I was
where
going to say
many
Free Willy comes to mind.
yeah, where not only is the tank not sort of wide enough, but also not deep enough. There have been cases, I think, where particularly with orcas, where they have bred them and then the calves have just repeatedly died because they usually go deep to suckle the calves. And so I know there was one case where I think the whale had about 7 calves that had all died, and that sort of thing is really, really tragic. So I think it depends what species they've got, but I think with a lot of the bigger fish and sharks and things like that, they're not necessarily always getting enough space, and particularly with those big sort of cetaceans, the whales and dolphins.
Yeah, when you consider the vast areas they cover when they're out in the ocean to being put into those small enclosures, it's beggars belief almost, isn't it, in terms of what would it be like putting yourself in that position, thinking about being an orca or a dolphin in an enclosed pool where you are just going round and round and you can't dive deep how you would naturally want to go. It just must be frustrating. And
I think really with those sort of marine mammals, you actually cannot fulfill their welfare needs.
You really can't
in a tank or a pool. In the wild they live in family groups, and although usually they have more than one, they're not big pods like they would be in the wild. They are such intelligent animals, and I think it has been shown that they suffer psychological stress by being in things like aquaria. They can't fulfil their natural behaviours, and often they're made to do things like tricks.
Yeah, which are just unnatural behaviours, aren't they, for them? They're being forced near enough to do those.
Yeah.
And I remember we went somewhere in Singapore, I think it was, and we saw pink dolphins actually in enclosure. And actually the enclosure they were in wasn't too bad, it was quite big, but again, the tricks that they were getting them to do, and you were just made you cringe actually watching it. But some of the dolphin encounters are done in the sea, aren't they, in these netted pens, but actually that still causes stress to the dolphins, doesn't it? So it restricts what they can do. Again, it's restricting their activities, and again exposing them to more people, so there'll be lots of people, they can't get away from them. And there's thinking about pollution and toxins as well, which may be there in that area. And
and they are doing things. I mean, I did many years ago, I did do a dolphin thing where it was that sort of thing where it was in the sea, so at the time I thought it was okay. I'm not sure, I wouldn't do it again now. But they were getting the dolphins to sort of come behind you and push your feet so that you were whizzed along in the water, which, and obviously they were rewarded. It was, positive reinforcement, but I wouldn't do it now.
No.
I mean, obviously, if you just go to out at sea and it's completely natural, they're quite curious about people and they might pop up or even want to swim with you, but that is totally their choice. It's not being enclosed in a sort of fixed area.
And it is, and you can, and we've done quite a lot of whale watching actually in various different areas of the world, and going out on boats to watch wild whales and dolphins is much more preferable, but I think I still have a bit of an issue with it, particularly in areas where there's lots of tourists, that you will have swarms of boats if a whale's seen or spotted that suddenly all appear because they're radioing each other. And actually, what is that like for those whales? I have a real concern as well, and for the dolphins, about the buzz and the noise of the boats, but actually just that crowding, it's dangerous as well, so they could get injured. And does it blow their mind, all that continual noise of the boats? I don't know, or do they just get used to it? I'm not sure.
I don't know, and certainly I went on a trip to see blue whales off Sri Lanka, and unfortunately it was, we were very far out, but there were quite a lot of boats, and when a whale did appear, there were quite a few dolphins and they were just going along the side of the boats, but obviously people weren't sort of honing in on them. When a blue whale actually appeared, I think they sort of crowded it a bit much, and it did make me feel a bit uncomfortable. So I think it depends a little bit. If it's somewhere where it's just you in one boat, then it's probably okay because they have the choice to go away. But it felt a bit like they're almost surrounding the whale, and I did think actually it could have just come up underneath one of the boats. So again, it's sort of thinking about in each situation what it is actually going to be like for the animals. But it is quite exciting when you do see them.
Yeah, no, it certainly is. And yeah, as I say, we've seen a few different whales in a few different oceans, and it's amazing if they come up and you actually get to see them, particularly if they're breaching. It's thrilling, it really is. So in terms of other animals, I suppose, seeing those in the wild, what would our advice be, I suppose, really, to ensure that the experience is a good experience, but also for the animals and for us? I think that's the important thing, because no matter where you go around the world, there'll be different wild animals, there'll be different experiences of all sorts that you can have.
And I think it's important that you find an ethical tour operator, and where they are aware of what it is actually like, and ideally somewhere where perhaps they don't allow that sort of crowding, because certainly on some safaris they do radio each other, and if there is something like a leopard, then loads of jeeps will suddenly appear. I was very, very lucky enough to go and see tigers in India, and actually they were incredibly well organised. It was a place called Ranthambore, which is the reserve in India where you're most likely to actually see tigers, and everybody gets allocated to one of their jeeps. You don't go in with your own driver, and you're allocated an area of the reserve. It's vast, it's absolutely vast, so you don't all go in the same bit. Now, you're more likely to see the tigers in some bits than others, so it tends to be you get 3 trips, and one of them you go to the area where you're probably not going to see tigers. But I saw a sloth bear, which is
very
like
exciting.
Baloo the bear in the Jungle Book. So actually it was really good because there was lots of other wildlife there, but they deliberately tried to stop it from being that everyone was in the same area. Once the tigers appeared, there were a couple of jeeps, but it wasn't as bad as I've seen in other places, and the tigers are so habituated to the jeeps, they're really, really not bothered about them. That was just absolutely thrilling. I think in areas of Kenya and probably Tanzania now, they've started increasing the prices to go on the safaris and decreasing the number of people going in because of these problems, which I think is, I mean, it's probably making it less accessible, but actually from the animal's point of view, it's probably better.
And I think the best wildlife encounter that I've definitely had was being in Madagascar and going through the rainforests, and actually it was just myself and my husband, so it was just 2 of us and a guide, and we were deep into some of the rainforests, but actually we were seeing lemurs in their natural environment, and actually they weren't scared of us. I think that's the other thing I say, because they weren't even used to really what people were. We were no threat. So we could actually get really close. It was amazing. We were there once within one of the forests with the Indri, which are the teddy bear black and white lemurs, and they do a really high pitched call, and it was unbelievable, but they were in the trees just all above us. So I think looking for experiences like that, when actually it's not the trodden path where all the tourists go, if you can afford it, then they would be certainly what I would recommend doing, because we literally were out in the middle of nowhere, just us. So avoiding those overcrowded parks, I think, would be my advice, and looking for the areas where animals aren't being pursued, where you haven't got those multiple vehicles, boats going after the same number of animals, I suppose.
I went to see look for bears in Romania, and there you went in a hide, so obviously it was totally up to the bears whether they came. I think they did put a little bit of food out, but it was only a couple of people at a time, And we did sit there for a very long time looking at the wild pigs, and then eventually 2 bears came, which was so exciting.
Special, isn't it?
And I think they were like fluffy Goldilocks bears. They were Eurasian brown bears, but they were sort of teenage bears. I think it looked like a brother and sister, and it was just magical. But yeah, it was totally their choice that they turned up there, and we were in the hide, and that was it. So I think it's definitely looking for those things where the animals are not being overcrowded, and it's really important that you keep your distance and you don't try to get closer and closer and closer. Yeah. Some of the animals will be used to people, and obviously something like a tiger, they are not frightened of you. No. But obviously when you're in an open top jeep, because they recognise the jeeps, if you got out they would recognise you as prey. So you never got out of the jeeps, but they didn't let it get to the stage where they walked right past you, just in case. They said, we've never had anyone taken off the back of a jeep, but there's always a first time. So obviously you have to be sensible, and even places like the Masai Mara I went to, where there are a lot of lions, so you're going to see them, so there doesn't tend to be quite so much crowding because there's plenty of lions for people to see. You can get quite close because they're used to it, but obviously should you, just because you can, and actually you do suddenly think, I can't actually have my window open by this very large male lion, or else he might try and jump in. But you really have to respect the animals, and
I think we went to the Arctic very similarly to see polar bears, and we chose the boat that we went on was a sailing boat that did have an engine, but it wasn't one of these big cruise liner type boats that went and disturbed. And actually our boat, a lot of the bigger boats take smaller boats onto shore, or they'll go along with, if you see any polar bears or any belugas, other whales, etc., they'll be with them. But the one we were on would only take you from the boat to the land to land you, so they wouldn't pursue or chase any of the animals that were either in the water or on the land. But so it was much better, it was much more natural that you could just watch them. But what I would say is the group that was there the week before we were there, they actually had to fire the gun at a mother polar bear with cubs, because they were starving. These polar bears were really quite skinny at the time of the year. We went in September, so there'd been a lot of melting of the ice during the summer, and they were hungry, they were struggling for food, so there was a risk to human life. But actually then that conversely concerns me, because there's a risk to the polar bear's life. So we're going there tourism to see them, but actually there was a risk that they may have had to have shot that polar bear if she hadn't have turned around. So
and that's the thing, you've got to remember that it's not just you. I mean, I was talking to some keepers at Longleat Safari Park, and I said, do people ever get out of their cars? Because obviously you drive through the areas. And she said, you would be surprised. There was a man who got out of his car, and they had a loud hailer on saying, get back in your car. And he was going, but I know karate. And they were saying, but if then one of the big cats had, and this was in the tiger area, had gone for him, they'd have had to have shot the tiger. And I just think it's so sad and selfish,
isn't it? It is.
And luckily they did get him back in the car, and they didn't have to do that. But it is another reason, don't put yourself in situations where obviously it's dangerous for you, but life-threatening potentially for the animal, not through their own fault. Because if they're predators and they're hungry, then they might see you as a snack.
One thing that I've just thought of in terms of seeing animals in the wild is also to say that actually you may go on a trip and not see the animal that you wanted to see. And it's as disappointing as it is, unfortunately, I think we've just got to accept that might be the case. I know when I did go to Kenya, I know we're talking about our own holidays a lot, but it's sort of examples, and I really wanted to try and see a cheetah in the wild, because I haven't seen cheetahs in the wild. And I was talking to one of the guides, and he just went, well, no, it's a good thing, because
the previous year it had been really dry, and so the animals were all starving, but you could see them because the grass wasn't very tall. They'd had some good rains, which was much better for the animals, but it meant with things like a cheetah it was harder to see them. And he said no, and then I felt really guilty for going, I haven't seen a cheetah. And yeah, in a way, if you don't see them, it does mean that probably it's a better place to try and see them. I didn't see leopards on that trip either, so at least they've got enough places to hide. So much of it can be frustrating, and I think it used to be in some of the reserves in India for the tigers that they did put carcasses out to attract them, but they don't do that now, and they're much stricter about how it's all controlled now. But yeah, so you have to be a bit careful about that sort of thing.
You do. And I suppose thinking about the wild animals that are actually more contained, so not out in the wild, we've got rescue and conservation facilities that we can also visit, and I know you visited a few, haven't you, in Africa as well?
Yeah, and some of them are great, and I was very lucky. I went to the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust in Nairobi, and I have to say it's just brilliant, and brilliant from a just an animal lover's point of view. But they rescue a lot of baby elephants that have been abandoned, or sometimes that the mother's been killed, and some other species as well. It's predominantly elephants, but they also they had a little rhino where its mother had been killed by poachers, and then it had been attacked by hyenas, and they'd rescued it and had to do lots of surgery, but it was doing really well. And they've got a little baby hippo there at the moment, so you can look online. Cute. But they they each have an individual keeper who sleeps in they each have their own little stable, and they take an awful lot of care, and obviously it takes a lot of time, but in the end, as they get bigger, they're introduced to a natural herd that they've formed, and then eventually they go out back into the Nairobi National Park, and some of them have actually had their own offspring, which I think is normally a sign that things are good. And yes, they do get used to people, but I think it's not in a way that's particularly harmful, and they do get really good care. And just the sight of them running towards their keepers with their big bottles of milk, because they knew it was time, and then they were rolling in the mud, just was joyful. And actually having the visitors does give them money to help look after them. So if it's a good place, and I also went to a giraffe centre where they were breeding Rothschild's giraffe, which are the rare species of giraffe. And again, they sort of could choose whether they interacted with you. You could feed them if they chose to come up. They had acres and acres to roam, and then they were only there temporarily, usually perhaps to have a calf, and then they were put back out. So but there are some facilities where they're purely running them as a sort of money-making enterprise, and sometimes it's where the animals are forced to interact with people, or even that they have a lot of disabled animals. And I think ones like paralysed dogs, where I would really question whether those animals should still be alive.
And there are it's hard, isn't it? There are some that are under the guise, therefore, of being in conservation facility. And I know we went to Tiger Temple in Thailand, the biggest mistake I think we've ever made, because actually it wasn't a conservation facility at all. It was a money-making scheme, and those tigers were being kept in really quite small, awful enclosures, in cages, and probably being sedated as well for interactions with people. So it's checking them out again, doing your research and making sure where you're going is what it says on the tin, really, isn't it? So actually they are funding good conservation work. Yeah,
because sometimes the animals are taken from their mothers, and some of these places where perhaps you can cuddle lion cubs and things like that. They have been deliberately taken out from the wild. Often the mothers are killed, And then what happens when they get too big to have the people having their photos with them? Well, unfortunately, in some areas, they're used for what's called canned hunting. And that's where people pay a huge amount of money to shoot in a small enclosure so that they, are successful in their hunt. I don't know, I find it just a weird thing that you would think that was great. Because it's so thrilling to see them alive, that the idea that you would think, hurrah, I'm going to kill them and then have my photo taken with them, just seems really awful. And I know sometimes people say, but that money goes into conservation. I'm not convinced that is actually true. But it sort of brings us into the sort of interaction, more direct interaction with wild animals, holding them for photos and mobile attractions, and certainly it's something we have a lot of concern about, don't we?
Yeah, and you'd like to think that actually that's not happening quite so much as it used to be, but certainly way back in the 60s and 70s you often see photos, I don't know, where parents or grandparents have been abroad and maybe there with a monkey or something, but I feel like we were away not that long ago in Mallorca, so a couple of years ago, and there were monkeys there. You could have your photograph taken with, and there were tourists there interacting and having it done. So it is definitely still going on, but making sure we advise against those types of interactions, definitely, wouldn't we?
Definitely. And in the UK, there are companies that will bring animals to parties or to schools. And often there's a whole range of different species that can be brought. There might be some domestic ones like rabbits and guinea pigs, but quite a lot of them will have some exotics like meerkats, snakes, owls. In the UK, they have to be licensed because they come under that, as we mentioned last time, the animal activities licensing. But I certainly have some concerns about them because quite often they have a little van, and so both prey and predator species are transported together in very close proximity.
So you might have rabbits and snakes in the same. And actually put along, I've been to a party with one of these, and they put all of the different cages out on the front table, and the rabbits were, and the mice actually were down one end, and the snakes were down the other end, but they're still in the same room.
They can see each other, they can smell each other. And obviously the animals are brought there so people can touch them and hold them, and they don't have much choice. And I think particularly if there's a loud children's party, then perhaps it's quite scary and stressful. So again, it's something I think I'd be quite cautious about.
Even just the transportation of those species, isn't it? Like they're taking them to and from a different place all the time, this novel new environment all the time. And actually the travel in the vehicle as well is stressful.
Because they're probably doing a few every day, aren't they? Particularly weekends. So I think that would be something probably to be avoided. There also are health and safety risks. With reptiles particularly, some can carry salmonella, and obviously you'd have to be very careful about hand hygiene. But I think overall it's something that I would be very, very
concerned about,
cautious about, really. So I think we've covered most things, haven't we?
I think that's a good breadth of interactions with wild animals, certainly, isn't it?
And I know we keep using the phrase in all our podcasts about doing your research, but I think it is important, and nowadays often you can find photos or videos or reviews online, so you can find the information out about these things. And I think if in doubt, the main message is if in doubt, don't do it.
Exactly, don't do it, and don't just see it as it's a tourist attraction, we're on holiday, we're there, we need something to do, let's go and do it, that looks fun. It is, don't do it on a whim. Go and find out more information about those animals and that facility. Okay, so I think we're probably out of time for this week, aren't we?
Yes, we are. So have a good summer and enjoy your holidays, and we'll see you next time.
Yep, stay safe.
Bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Vet Stalking Pets with Dr. Maggie Roberts and Dr. Vanessa Howie. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at info@advovet.co.uk. and please join us again for our next episode. Your pets will thank you.